Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name's Katie, I'm a mixed media artist, and today I want to share a mini art haul that I bought last week and also how I use these materials. So last week it was Black Friday and there were a few art sites that had some discounted products. So I shopped on Cult Pens and Cass Art, which are UK based brands. I didn't buy a huge amount, so this is quite a small art haul, but I did buy a few new tubes of gouache, some Liquitex markers, and then replaced some of my Luminance. There are some new colours here that I've never tried before, so I'm looking forward to swatching them, and then I'll be creating an illustration using this colour palette. I really hope you enjoy watching. Let's get into the haul. So I'm going to start off with the order that I got from Cult Pens. They had a 30% off selected brands, so I bought a few different things. I'm going to start with the gouache. So this is De La Rowney gouache. I have used De La Rowney before, it's one of my go-to gouache, usually the designer's gouache. But this one is their Aquafine gouache, opaque watercolour, so I haven't tried that before, but it looks pretty similar. These are colours that I don't already have, so I went for the 667 Raw Sienna and the Portrait Pink 578. On the website this was actually peach pink, so I'm presuming it's the same thing. This was a lot cheaper than the designer's gouache, so it'll be interesting to see the difference in consistency, because I got this for £1.92 for the tube, so that's really good for the size because this is 15mm. And then this one I was really pleased with the price as well. I got this for £2.81, so really good colours to add to my collection. And then I also bought a new acrylic ink. I have got a few of these De La Rowney System 3 acrylic inks. I really like them, but I wanted a more neutral colour because I only have the primary colour set. So I thought I would invest in this one. This was a really good price again. This was 30% off, so instead of £5 it was £3.50 for this jar of 29.5ml. This is also Portrait Pink. I expected it to be a lot more pink than it is. Even if I compare it to the De La Rowney Portrait Pink gouache, you can see a big difference there. This is a lot more red toned and this is definitely more on the beige side, so not quite what I was expecting. I'm going to see how that swatches. And then the only other three things I got were some more of my Caran Luminance pencils. So I always talk about these in terms of building up my collection slowly, and I wanted to replace a few colours that I use a lot. So some of my Luminance pencils are nubs now. If you've seen the video where I swatch and compare colour pencils, I'll link that up in the cards. You'll know that these are very soft and they're my favourites, but they do wear down quickly. So I do find I have to replace them a lot, but I did get these again 30% off, so that worked out at £2.40 per pencil, which is a bit more reasonable. So I replaced my dark Indigo 639. I use this a lot for line work, and basically it's a great shadow colour for any shades that I use. And I also replaced my Anthraquinoid pink. This is 571. I was surprised by how much I used this when I first bought it, so I really wanted to have a backup in my collection. And then a new colour for me. So I generally buy one or two when I am making an art order just to try and build the collection up slowly, and this one is Violet Grey 093. So let's swatch all these in my sketchbook. So I'm going to be swatching just in my larger Royal Talon sketchbook. I'm starting with the Cult Pens order and then I will show you what I bought from Cass Art. So let's start with the gouache. This Raw Sienna, this is like a dark ochre, I'd say. Just going to put it a little bit down, and I'll just dip my brush in water and use it like I normally would. So I know that I really enjoy using the De La Rowney designer's gouache, so it's no surprise there. I think that's a really nice warm toned brown. It's a little bit less yellow than I thought it would be, but I still really like that colour, and like I said, it's not one I've got in my collection. I do have an ochre, which I generally use, but this is a lot more red toned. So now onto the Portrait Pink. I'm interested to see how this compares. So it feels just as thick actually. I don't know why it was cheaper. It feels exactly the same as the designer's gouache. It feels very similar to the Flesh Pink I have, which is also by De La Rowney. Possibly a bit darker and maybe a bit more brown red toned. but I think that's really nice. I think that will be another nice one to have in my collection. And I really want to see how it compares to the Portrait Pink, which is the same name but totally different colour by the looks of it. So this is acrylic ink. It's very wet. It's not like acrylic at all, but obviously it can't be reactivated like gouache is because it's not water soluble. So I'm just going to pop that down. This definitely doesn't feel like a pink at all. One of the things I really like about acrylic ink is the opacity. You can see there just how nicely it goes on. I feel like these three are very similar, especially these two, but I wouldn't say they're the same shade at all. This one's more orangey, but I think that's a really nice neutral. And I don't have anything like that in my acrylic ink at the moment, so that's fun. And now for the coloured pencils. So first up, the dark indigo. I'm pretty sure I've swatched this quite a few times on my channel. I kind of use this as a black tone because I never use black in my work. I'd rather go for this, which is a really, really dark blue. And then the Anthraquinoid pink 571. Sometimes this is hard to photograph, that's the only thing I find with it. But I think this is a really nice bright pink. And then the last one I've got is the Violet Grey 093. So this is more like a, well, it says it in the name, it's a purpley grey. Definitely more violet than like a neutral grey. I'd say it leans more on the purple spectrum than it does grey. But I think that's really nice, and actually those three work together really nicely. So now I swatched those, let's go on to the Cass art box and I'll show you what I bought from there. So again, another relatively small order. They don't do Winsor & Newton gouache at Cult Pens, which is why I didn't buy those there. So these were slightly more expensive, but again, Winsor & Newton is a brand I really love. And then I also bought 2 more Liquitex acrylic markers. So the 2 shades I got in the Winsor & Newton Designers Gouache was the Naples Yellow. This is a really nice warm toned yellow. I tend to always mix in my cadmium yellow hue, but I wanted something a bit more subtle, and I saw my friend TJ, who's Sketch It Studio, share her colour palette, and this was one of hers, as well as the raw sienna, so I wanted to add those to my collection. Like I said, Cult Pens doesn't do Winsor & Newton gouache, and so I got this from Cass Art and they had 20% off for their Black Friday sale, which meant I got these Winsor & Newton Designers Gouache tubes for £4.20. So not as big of a saving, but still cheaper than they normally are, which is about £5.25 each. So the other shade I got was Linden Green. This was recommended to me by a follower, Nicola, who knows that I really love this vibrant green, and I usually mix that up using my chromium oxide green and my cadmium yellow hue. But I'm really excited to try this out. It's a really bright green, not a colour I've seen before. And this one's Series 1 and this one's Series 2. This shade is more expensive. There are sometimes pigments which are more expensive, so they're not always the same. I've just checked my order and this one was more expensive. So this retails at £5.25 and this one's £5.85. So I guess it is to do with the pigments inside. So I got this one for £4.68. And then if you've seen my acrylic marker video, again I will link that up in the cards and in the description box. You know that acrylic marker pens are my new thing. I've really enjoyed using them this year and mixing my own with the Montanas and also trying a lot of different brands. I really like the Liquitex ones, and I found that I wanted to get a few more for my collection that were a little bit more neutral. And I feel like these two I'm definitely going to get a lot of use out of. I seem to have bought a lot of pink in this haul, so maybe I'm in my pink era, but I'm really looking forward to seeing how that compares with the other two. So these retail at £6.95 each, and I got these for £5.56 with the 20% off. So I got the Unbleached Titanium. These are both the 8 to 15mm size, so the size I prefer with the really thick nib, and then this one is light pink. So you can see the nib size a little bit better here. This is 8 and this one's 15, but I find because of the hardness of this nib, you can get really fine lines with these, which is really handy, but you can also put down a huge amount. So I need to pump the paint through to these and then I will swatch them on the sketchbook like I did with the others. So I'm going to start with the Naples Yellow. This is a shade I haven't ever used, so completely new to me. That looks like a really nice buttery yellow. I really like the consistency of Winsor Newton paints. They're generally the same, around the same price as the De La Rowney, but I use them interchangeably and I do mix them up. But that's a really lovely colour, really warm, definitely a hint of orange in there too. You can definitely see that these are all sort of very similar tones, but I think that they'll all go really nicely together and be really handy for landscapes. So now let's swatch the Linden green. Again, another colour I haven't used before. I really enjoy just building up my collection slowly, and it's always nice to see what other artists use and get recommendations from them as well. So that is really vibrant. I don't know if the camera will completely pick it up because it kind of looks a little bit like neon. Really nice green. That is so vibrant, very different from all the other ones I've swatched on this page here. I think that will be really nice. I do like using the lemon yellow near colour, which does remind me a bit of this. And I think that will be really nice for grass tones. And I think it will layer really nicely with my chromium oxide green as well. It looks a little bit more yellow on camera. It's definitely a bit more green toned in real life. And now for the Liquitex markers. So to pump these through, you just do this a lot and you do have to shake them. So I'm going to do that off camera. So I'll start off with the light pink. I really like the consistency. It does depend on the pigment again. So this one does seem a little bit wetter than some of the other Liquitex markers I have, but really nice and opaque. And there's the thinness of the line that you can get and also how thick you can get with the chunkier side. So for me, I think that's a really nice warm pink. It's a lot less orange toned. I can see that this top one, which is the portrait pink, has dried a lot darker than it put down, which is quite interesting. I think the flesh pink I have is a lot lighter, but it's definitely not really an accurate representation to what is on the tube. It's a lot darker and a lot more orange toned. And this is also dried darker. I'd say this one, which is the raw Sienna, is quite similar. And this acrylic ink portrait pink has also dried darker, so definitely something to think about, and I think that's why it's always really helpful to have these swatch pages. So the last one to swatch is the Unbleached Titanium. I think this will be really helpful. Probably would have been more helpful earlier in the month as I was doing Urban Sketching Month on Patreon, but I really like that. That seems a lot less watery than the pink one. Really nice coverage, very thick. I think that would be really helpful for buildings. I think this will pair really nicely with those few at the top as well. That feels like it's in the same range. So I think apart from that very bright Linden green, if I cover that up, this is a really nice neutral colour palette. Obviously this one does throw it off, but I really like these together. So I think this pink, the Linden green, the Anthraquinoid pink and the violet grey would work really nicely together as well, so as a much brighter palette. So I like pages like this because you can kind of see what works together, and like I don't know if I would have paired them together if I hadn't swatched them on the same page, but I really like all of these colours. It was interesting how these dried darker, so that's really helpful to know. And this is a lot more similar to the raw Sienna than I expected. I think that this was really helpful, and now what I'm going to do is create a page over here, so on the other side of this spread, and we'll create an illustration using these colours. I might add in a couple more, so probably another green and a light blue, but we're going to use mostly these colours to create an illustration here on this side of the page. So here I am getting my reference ready. I'm referencing it from a book called The British Isles. I shared this one in one of my reference book shares, which was a recent video about my top books for referencing for art, and this is a painting of a little village in the Cotswolds. So I'm just putting the new gouache colours onto my paper palette. I love using these tear-off palettes, and I am also adding in a white, which is from this larger tube of Pebeo white, as well as a Winsor Newton Designer's Gouache in Chromium Oxide Green, and then a blue using the primary blue colour. I'm just using a size 10 round brush, which is really handy for creating lots of texture. So you'll see I'm starting with the sky, and I'm using my brush quite freely and quite messily really, just to try and create some of that texture in the sky to mimic the clouds. I'm trying to use all of the colours that you'll have just seen me show in the haul. So I'm also using the acrylic markers, and I'm kind of just working out the main shapes. I'm trying to match the colours with what I have, but because there's not much pink in the reference, I decided to add more pink in the sky, which you'll see later, and just generally ramp up the colours, so really saturate what I can see, which is generally how I work anyway, but especially using that Linden green, instead of doing a darker green, I'll just make it more yellow in my illustration. So here is the acrylic ink, just put that straight onto the page rather than mixing it up. And then I do create more texture and add on top of it using some gouache and later on some pencils. So even though the colours aren't perfectly matched, that doesn't matter for me. I generally do make it a bit more vibrant, but I usually stick to the colours that I can see. So I know that even though this colour isn't exact, I can just mix up and layer up to try and create a bit more of an accurate colour. So I'm going to leave my voiceover there because I think the rest of it's quite self-explanatory. You've seen the materials that I'm using, and I'm just sort of alternating between them. I'm not using one set of mediums like the gouache first and then the acrylic ink. I'll generally just mix up what colour I need, and then I might come back to the acrylic markers later, but I usually add on the pencils towards the end as well as some near colours. If you have any questions at all, then please do pop them in the comments, but I hope you enjoy watching the rest of this process come together, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. A huge thank you for watching. I hope you have a creative week.